Darkness falls, shadows creep, and the stories that keep you up at night come to life. On this episode of Let's Find Out, we step into the eerie, often scary world of author Grady Hendrix. He is a mastermind behind some of the most chilling tales in modern horror. How does he know how to make our spine tingle? What fuels his fascination with fear? And what advice does he have for aspiring authors? Let's pull back the curtain, if you dare. Welcome to Let's Find Out, the Arapahoe Libraries podcast.
I try to find the hoariest, most barnacle-covered, rust-encrusted cliche I can in horror, and I try to scrape the barnacles off it. And think, why was this scary?
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Let's Find Out, Arapahoe Libraries podcast. Hear from authors, experts, and opinion leaders to spark ideas, solve problems, and enrich your life. In Arapahoe Libraries, we turn every search for knowledge into a helpful adventure. On today's Let's Find Out podcast, we welcome author, journalist, and screenwriter Grady Hendrix. Grady Hendrix's latest book is titled Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. Now, a quick heads up before we get started. This episode does contain a very brief mention of rape. It's at about the 7.5-minute mark in the podcast. We wanted to let you know in advance. And if you or someone you know is affected by sexual violence, we have links to resources which are included in our show notes. Mr. Hendrix, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you joining the Let's Find Out podcast. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's talk about this, the horror genre. What makes this so popular, do you think?
Well, not popular enough, man. Romance is beating us like a rented mule these days. And those romantasy books are really, we can't get ahead of those dragons. But horror comes and goes in cycles. I'm part of a group of guys and writers, Stephen Graham Jones, Paul Tremblay, Victor Laval. We all sort of started writing or started publishing around 2012, 2014 in there. And horror was pretty dead at that point. Most Barnes and Nobles had taken out their horror sections. It just wasn't a thing. And now, they've got horror sections again. They're actually quite sizable. And a lot of independent bookstores are doing really well with horror. So, it comes and it goes. There doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason why. So we're all just waiting for it to go. Any minute it'll stop being popular again.
What drew you to this genre?
Well, to be honest, it's what people paid me to write. I actually was not a huge horror reader as a kid. I just thought the book covers were too freaky. And, I think like every kid, I read Stephen King and Clive Barker and people like that. And when I started writing, it was horror. Like I sort of wound up writing horror adjacent stuff, and that's what people really responded to, and so I kind of doubled down. And it's a genre that fits me pretty well. I'm not good at writing about ideas, or which is sort of the province of science fiction, and I'm not really good at world building, which is sort of the province of fantasy. And so I always wind up kind of wanting to write about the world, the here and now, sort of human beings in the world, and, just have it not be boring. And that's hard.
Yeah. Do you plan the scares or the moments of tension, or do they just kind of emerge naturally as you're writing?
You plan a lot of them, but also there definitely, if something sort of like presents itself, you'd be a fool not to capitalize on it. And in general, giving the scares room, giving the sort of emotional stuff in a book room is kind of what the rewriting process is about. I always discover for me, I'm pulling out more and more plot and incident and leaving more and more room in there for the characters to kind of react to what's going on. And that's sort of what rewriting is for me, stripping the book down to the emotions.
Do you draw inspiration from your own personal fears or nightmares?
Oh, sure. I don't think I could write about something. I don't think I could make something scary if on some level I didn't find it scary myself. So yeah, but as a horror writer, you wind up being kind of scared of everything, because you've got to convince yourself of why everything's scary.
What have been your influences? Are there other authors or books or movies or?
Oh, sure. I mean, within horror, I think really for most of us, you're looking at like Shirley Jackson, and certainly for me, Charles Portis, who wrote True Grit's a big influence. I find books like Shirley Jackson's We've Always Lived in the Castle and Charles Portis's True Grit, books that really resonate for me, and they're the opposite of the kind of thing that I write. I write longer books that are usually in third person, and those are very voicey books that are in first person. But I find them tremendously, something to aspire to, writing shorter books.
Shorter books. Let's talk about your latest book. It's called Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. How would you describe it?
It's a book set in 1970 in a home for unwed mothers about four teenage girls who get sent there to have their babies in secret. And they find at the time there were a lot of occult books getting published in the late 60s, early 70s. You buy them at supermarket checkout racks, aisles, and things like that. And they're reading one of them that turns out to be real. And so these girls who have no information about what's going to happen to them or their bodies or their babies, and no power over what's happening to them or their bodies or their babies, suddenly have that information and that power. And, complications ensue.
No doubt. Yeah. So how does a guy write about the experiences of four pregnant teens?
With a lot of help. I had about 12 moms who really let me bug them with very personal questions. And I had about four OBs I worked with, and laborists who really walked me through things. I had a massive, it's off my desk now, but a massive rack of research, everything from my Williams obstetrics manual from 1968 to some midwifing books. And I mean, just everything I could get my hands on.
Sure. Yeah. Research is key. And I
Yeah.
read that this practice of children born to women and girls in maternity homes and then taken away to be put up for adoption was not something you made up. This was prevalent years ago. Were you surprised by what you found?
Um, No, I had two relatives who were both sent away, and we didn't find this out until they were probably in their 70s. But when they were teenagers, they were both raped and sent away to have their babies and have them put up for adoption. And one of them reunited with her son much, much later in life, and the other never reunited with her daughter. Um, and the homes were everywhere. There was 100 and something of them across the U.S. They've always been around. They're still around to this day in some capacity. The New York Times just had a big article about unlicensed maternity homes down in Florida. The big era for them, though, was what's known as the baby scoop era, which was about into World War II to 45 to about 73, which was Roe versus Wade. And there were I think it was about 4 million kids went up for adoption out of the homes during those years. And that's sort of what we have a record of. So, the homes touched millions of lives and continue to this day. I'm on the road doing book tour, and at every event, there's someone who was either sent away to a home when they were a kid or someone who was born in a home. One of my cousins does family law, and she's always dealing with pregnant teenagers being sent away to an aunt's house or, put into hiding while they have their baby. So this is something that's been around for a long time.
Well, women, it seems, often take a pretty significant role in many of your novels. I'm sure that's not by accident. Why do women characters play vital roles in your stories, you think?
I don't know. I mean, sometimes it happens for the story. In this case, I couldn't really write about maternity homes for men. There's no such thing. Or I did a book called Final Girl Support Group, which is about sort of that last woman who's left alive at the end of a slasher movie. And there's a few final boys in film history, but the famous ones are people like, Jamie Lee Curtis playing Laurie Strode or Nev Campbell playing Sydney and Scream and things. So sometimes, it's the story has to have a female main character, but it's something I started doing because I really wanted my characters to be different than I was. I needed to write about people and not just variations on myself. And the easiest way to sort of hold the character at arm's length and for me to see them as a person rather than just some reflection of me was to swap the gender and make them women.
Interesting. The head witch in this book, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, is a librarian, which of course
Mm,
got our attention here at Arapahoe Libraries.
sure.
How did that come about?
Well, I am a sellout, and I always get people asking me at events. I get a lot of librarians at events. They're always like, "Why can't you put a librarian in your book?" And when I realized that this book was going to revolve around a book, I was like, "Well, librarian makes total sense here." Actually, I was just at a library in Largo, Florida, where they let me get on their bookmobile. First time I've been in one. I always thought they were so romantic and cool when I was a kid, but I never
Mhm.
got to go in one. But also, witches and librarians have a lot of points in common. I mean, witches are, they pass on knowledge, right? They get knowledge and information to the people who need it, and I feel like that's kind of what librarians do to some extent.
Yeah, and I've heard you speak before about the importance of libraries this day
Yeah.
and age. Yeah, and why do you feel they're important?
Well, it's funny to me, public parks and libraries are two of the only public goods we have left. They are there for nothing more than everyone's pleasure. Anyone can walk in, rich, poor, homeless, not homeless, whoever you are, you can walk into a library and find what you need. And librarians do so much more than check out books. I mean, this isn't a news flash to you guys, but I think a lot of people do think librarians do nothing more than check out books. And, I think librarians do astonishing work. I mean, helping people fill out job applications and deal with legal papers and, health concerns and giving people a safe space in the world, doing kids programs, literacy programs. I mean, libraries are really one of those things that we can't throw enough money at.
Yeah. How do you research for your stories? I mean, do you dive into folklore or look hear of urban legends or true crime or what appeals to you?
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's a really boring answer. So usually when I'm writing a book, I've got something I'm dealing with that's sort of part and parcel of horror territory, whether it's haunted houses or vampires or witchcraft. And I usually have a reference. Like when I wrote a book called Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, I really like Dracula was a real reference for me. When I wrote this book, there was a book, actually, it was mostly maternity manuals, but there was a book on, not really a book, but it's sort of called, it's a lot of material around Wicca. That was a really big influence for me. Um, but there was also a book of Appalachian folk magic that was a big influence. But usually that's it. And what takes up so much of my time researching is all the mundane stuff from what's on TV on a Thursday night in St. Augustine, Florida in 1970 to how babies are born, and what obstetric practices are in 1970 and what they were in Florida. Um, Adoption law, that kind of thing. Okay, my characters are going to Flagler Hospital. Will they getting driven up to the front door? Do you have to walk in? Like where are they going to go? And and I do an insane amount of research on that. And actually, I wrote a book called My Best Friend's Exorcism that's set in my hometown. It was set in 1988, and man, I had weather charts for every night. When I did Witchcraft, I went down to St. Augustine and read the local paper for every. I think it was 5 months of it, spanning the time the book was set in 1970, summer of 1970. But for Best Friend's Exorcism, I was obsessed with the weather, and I had weather charts for 1988 in my hometown and all these things, and I really wanted a storm to happen at the climax, and it was driving me nuts. I was like, "Oh, I can move the book," and then I finally was like, "Wait, I could just make it up. Like, no one's gonna call me out for putting a storm 5 days early in 1988 October." And no one ever has. I'm very lucky.
That is good. Yeah, research is important because I suppose there might be one of those people who'd say, "Wait a minute, Chevrolet didn't make a model like that
No,
in 1939, right?"
constantly. I mean, I've got other writers I send my stuff to that catch stuff like that. I mean, that's one of those things you just don't. There's a funny bargain between a writer and a reader, which is basically they're letting you hijack their attention. But there's so many things you can do that can ruin that. It's a really delicate act, and one of them is having something in the book that they know is not true, and that bumps people right out of it. And you've all your hard work is for nothing.
Yeah, yeah. What trends do you see kind of shaping the future of the horror genre?
Oh man, if I knew, I would be embracing them and not telling anyone.
Yeah, I'm not
I don't.
sharing it. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. I know it's funny. Horror's a weird thing. I mean, it's a little bit like science fiction in the sense that people always think science fiction is writing about the future, predicting the future as a part of science fiction. And science fiction is actually really, really bad at predicting the future. And horror is an interesting thing because it's really that you always want to sort of see what people are scared of and capitalize on it. But horror is really bad at that. Like, I know a lot of people who are trying to write books right now about, like, technology and scary things about the internet and AI and stuff like that. And I I know they're all having a rough time of it. And so it's one of those things that I'm always sort of I sort of go the other way, which I try to find the hoariest, most um, uh, barnacle covered, rust encrusted cliche I can in horror, and I try to like scrape the barnacles off it and think, why was this scary? Why was this scary in the first place? I wrote a vampire book called Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and actually, um, I had tried to write it 2 years before I actually wrote it, and I had started it, and my editor had given me the go ahead. And then he was like, you know what? After about 6 weeks, he was like, vampires, man, who's scared of those anymore? Twilight's big, like and we canned it because he thought vampires just weren't scary anymore. Um, but for me, what I really realized with vampires is vampires are the monster that looks like us. They are the serial killer of monsters. They live right next door and look like us. And eventually, you see them on the 6 o'clock news with their backyard being excavated and they're finding a bunch of bodies. And all the neighbors are saying, he was such a nice man, kept to himself, very quiet. And so right now I'm getting ready to start a new book, and it is, I'm not going to say what it's about, but I have tried to find the most unthreatening, played out, boring cliche in horror. And I'm having a lot of fun writing it and discovering, oh, that's why people used to be scared of this thing.
We have many a budding author who follow this podcast. They're regular patrons of Arapahoe Libraries. What advice might you have for aspiring authors?
Yeah. So, well, there's two things. And one is, I always feel like with writers, you gotta write stuff that other people read. I mean, if you are writing to be read, you gotta have other people reading your stuff. I know a lot of writers who start 50 short stories and never finish them. I was one of those people. And you got to write stuff that you finish, that you give to people to read, that you get feedback from them, and you incorporate it. That's the only way to get better. But one thing that I do think is a useful piece of advice, it's sort of for everyone, no matter if they're writing to be read or if they're writing for their own gratification, is you've got to write about specific things, specific details. I see so many sort of writers starting out who say things like, there were a lot of tires leaning against the side of the house. I don't know what that means. Are they talking 3 tires? Are they talking 100 tires? Are they talking 2 tires? Are they talking 50 tires? Those are all very different mental images. And people they take that kind of shortcut a lot. It was a real far trip. It was a really long trip. I don't know, an hour, a year, a day. Like, it's just nailing down those specific details. It's really what writing is about. And I feel like a lot of writers sort of wave those things away because they want to get to the good stuff. They're excited about writing, the love scene or the action scene or the scene where the werewolf jumps through the window. And I promise you, your writing will be better if every detail is specific.
Good advice. You started off as a journalist, and journalists learn how to work quickly, right? Because of that
Yes.
ever looming deadline.
Oh, yeah.
How did that background help you as a book author?
Well, so I don't know if it helped me or hurt me. I think someone once said to Bob, so one thing it did is taught me how to write quickly and on a deadline, like you noted. But Robert Caro, who's writing the LBJ biography that will one day be finished, he said that he writes longhand usually because someone had once told him he thought too quickly with his fingers, meaning he was typing so fast and doing all that thinking too quickly. And that's something that really is a problem I have. I go too fast. So I wind up banging out draft after draft after draft that only incrementally get better. And I really wish I could just slow it down and do better in the first place. The place where journalism really did help me, though, is if you write professionally, it's always collaborative. You will always be dealing with an editor, multiple editors, copy editors, all kinds of people. And it had never occurred to me to be precious about it because I started out writing with an editor looking over my shoulder and just, they're not sitting there saying, well, I think this story would be better if you just cut these two. They're just like, bang, these sentences are gone. And so to me, writing was always collaborative. And I didn't realize how unusual that was for fiction writers until one of my editors turned to me and is like, most writers don't act like this. They don't take this kind of editing well. I was like, oh yeah, well, that's how I learned it.
Yeah. How did you get your first novel published?
Well, it was sort of a case of who I knew. It was nepotism. So I had been doing journalism until about 2008, and those jobs just went away. Then, the everyone just beat their staff writers to generate more copy instead of hiring freelancers. And I went to a workshop called Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Workshop out of the UC San Diego. It's a 6-week program in the summer. And I realized how bad I was compared to the other writers there, and that I needed to step up my game really intensely. I needed to either get serious and buckle down and do the work, or I should go to law school. And I buckled down and started writing seriously. And I didn't sell a book for about 5 years after that, but I wrote books and I wrote stories and I was sending stuff out and getting things published and getting feedback. And I co-wrote a couple of books with a friend who needed some help at the last minute. I co-wrote a cookbook with my wife, who's a chef who owns a restaurant. And then a friend of mine's girlfriend, now wife, from Clarion, someone I went to Clarion with, his girlfriend was an editor. And she was interviewing for an editorial position at a very small press called Quirk. And the editor who interviewed her said, well, who are some writers you'd want to bring over? And she mentioned me, and she didn't get the job, but the editor got in touch and said, you got something I can read. And I had 3 novels sitting in a drawer or on my hard drive. I sent him one and he hated it, but he liked my writing style and was like, well, I need someone to write a haunted house book. I really want to do a new take on a haunted house book. And we sort of banged around an idea. And he was like, we were like, oh, it'd be really cool to do a haunted big box store. And then he was like, oh my God, IKEA. And so that's how Horrorstör, my first novel, came about. But yeah, it was really a case of, luck, really.
That does play a part in all this, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yes. Well, luck and being prepared for luck, having that book ready,
Yeah. Doing the work, as you said,
Yeah.
put the work into it. You do a fair amount of screenwriting as well. How does that help you in your book writing? Does it?
Oh, a huge amount. Book writing makes me a worse screenwriter, but screenwriting makes me a better novel writer. Screenplays are super efficient. I mean, I can't tell you. It's funny. You can look at my early books like Horrorstör, where I just don't use the time on the page efficiently. I've got characters sitting in their cars, not doing anything, not going anywhere, to scenes of it. And I realize now, if I've got a character in a car, if you read my books, my later books, if a character's in a car, there's someone else in the car with them that they're talking to, and they either really don't want to go where they're going, or they really got to get where they're going. It just teaches you to be efficient. If you're going to introduce a character, make it memorable. Give the actor something to play. Don't waste time. I read books now and I'm astonished at how much of the reader's attention people just waste, which is something it's not an option in screenwriting. So it's made me a much more efficient writer, and much better about sort of finding where the story is and getting the most out of it rather than wasting time on BS.
Good input. That's great. Grady, thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us for this podcast. Thank you so much.
No, man, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Many thanks to Grady Hendrix for taking us on that fascinating journey and sharing his writing process and expertise. Whether you're an avid reader or an aspiring writer, Arapahoe Libraries has you covered. You can find Grady's collection of horror novels in a variety of book formats at arapahoelibraries.org and discover writers' resources at arapahoelibraries.org/writers-resources. That's arapahoelibraries.org/writers-resources. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Let's Find Out, Arapahoe Libraries podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and visit us online at arapahoelibraries.org.